Greetings everybody, and welcome to my 7 Days to Die tutorial on structural integrity. Now for anyone who is new to playing 7 Days to Die, and you're trying to build bases and you keep running into the issues that when you start building roofs and things they just fall in on your face, and you're not sure why this is happening, then I think this tutorial might be good to help you get used to what structural integrity is and how you work with it. So essentially, if we look at this pillar here, we can start pushing blocks out from this pillar, and you'll see that so far everything is okay. So it looks like this is holding the appropriate amount of weight. Now for anyone who's played games like Minecraft, you know that you can just pretty much go as long as you can. You can keep pushing blocks out and out and out and out for as long as you like, and you won't have any consequences to your actions. However, in 7 Days to Die, physics exists. So if I put one more on, you're going to see, oh no, the whole structure fell down. And what is also true is you can't just have randomly floating blocks. So if, for example, I was to take this block out here, if I was to take this one out, these two blocks will fall down, just because, like with the previous example, physics does take hold. So unfortunately, folks, in 7 Days to Die, physics do count, which is going to impact how you build your bases. So this tutorial aims to cover all the pitfalls of structural integrity that I think new players might fall into. I know I made plenty of mistakes when I started this game, and hopefully it will show you how to build effective bases and make sure your structure is supported from the ground up. So without any further ado, guys, let's get into Structural Integrity Basics 101. Okay guys, well over here, as you can see, I've set up a whole host of common building blocks that you're going to encounter when building your base, and in a minute we are going to test out exactly how much each of these blocks can hold. So as you can see, I've got wood on this end, I've got scrap iron, cobblestone, metal trussing, iron bars, there's some concrete over there, and right over there there's steel. Now, before we actually do that, I want to bring you round to these two structures right here, because before we begin all that awesome stuff, I want to go over just a little bit of terminology so you guys know exactly what I'm referring to when we're going throughout the tutorial, because there's going to be a few certain things that I'm going to use, and I just want you guys to know exactly what I mean. So, first of all, I'm going to direct your attention to these wood blocks. Now, these wood blocks are connected directly to bedrock, so these are standing right on top of dirt, these dirt blocks are standing on top of stone and ores and things underneath the ground, and all that is stood on top of bedrock. Now, any block, it doesn't matter what it is, it can be wood, it can be cobblestone, it can be flagstone, adobe, or steel, or anything, iron bars, doors, it doesn't matter, as long as these are directly on top of bedrock without any air in between, these are called structurally sound blocks. Now, the ones over here that I've made out of the wood frames, you can see these blocks are being supported by the structurally sound blocks. So these blocks here are called supported blocks. And as you can see, these ones are being supported just fine. Wood can support up to 6 wooden blocks on any of their faces, because these ones are structurally sound. So any structurally sound blocks can support the maximum number of blocks on each block face. Now, I'm going to come over to this one here, and as you can see, this structure is pretty much exactly the same as the one we had before it. However, I've made a little adjustment to it. Now, under here, you can see I've got a dirt block, I've got a couple of wood frames, and then underneath that is some more dirt, and it connects all the way to bedrock. So, right now, these blocks are still structurally sound, and these blocks are still supported. However, I'm going to break the connection to the bedrock layer, and let's see what happens. Oh no! The entire structure has fallen in. Because what happened is, when we broke the wood frame and took it away, the dirt on top became a supporting block. It was a supported block. It was no longer structurally sound. So therefore, all of the blocks that were on top of that dirt, which were these wood frames and things, they were no longer structurally sound. They were actually supported blocks. And because the dirt couldn't support all the weight on top of it, it just fell down completely, and it caused the entire structure to collapse in. So, the first rule of structural integrity is, don't dig directly under your base, unless you know exactly what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to risk the entire thing falling on your face. Alright, let's move on to the next bit. Alrighty guys, rule number 2 of structural integrity is it really doesn't matter how tall you build your base. And that's one of the cool things about the structural integrity and how it's worked out. So essentially you can see that I built a structure that is 2 blocks off the ground. There's one that's 3 blocks off the ground, 5, 10, and a whopping 40 or 50. I didn't actually count how high that is. However, you can see that all the principles that we've talked about from this example apply to all of these. So just remember, it doesn't matter how high you build your base. I mean, as long as you've got enough resources, you can build your base this high off the ground if you like. I recommend that you don't, but you can. So I just thought I would cover that just so you guys know that height doesn't matter as long as your supports are structurally sound. Rule number 3 of structural integrity, and this one is going to apply to anyone who likes building bridges or structures which have only minimal amounts of support. Rule number 3 is player weight and zombie weight also has an effect on how stable your structures are. So you can see for this structure I built it pretty much out of metal trussing, and I have 3 structurally sound blocks of metal trussing here, and then all of these 15 blocks along are supported. So that's why metal trussing is brilliant, because they can support a huge amount of weight on each side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how the weight actually affects things. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to start walking along the top, and as you can see so far it's fine. You're thinking, what's the problem? However, when I get to block number 15, I fell off the top. The block actually caved in, and essentially what that means is if there are more players and zombies on the top of this thing, it's not just going to be this 15th block that caves in, it's going to be like the 14th, the 13th, the 12th. So yeah, zombies and players going on top of this is going to affect the stability somewhat. Now, there is actually a way to get around this to a degree. As you can see over here, I've made exactly the same structure. However, this time, instead of using 1 layer of trussing as supported blocks, I've used 2 layers of trussing. Now, what happens this time is when I come up here and walk across the top, you will very quickly see that this is so much more stable, because now when I stand on this 15th block, I can jump around on it, I can dance, I can punch the air, I can do whatever I like on it. As you can see, it doesn't cave in. And just to prove to you guys that these are supported blocks rather than structurally stable ones, you can see that there is a block of air here. So these ones are not structurally stable, but they are still supported by those ones, regardless of the fact that I was actually on top of this one at the time. So for anyone who likes building bridges and stuff, I would recommend that you actually double layer your trussing just to make things a little bit more stable and prevent some cave-ins. Alrighty guys, so far I've been showing you all the stuff to do with structural integrity with a building a bit like this. So we have the structurally stable blocks here and the supporting blocks right here. However, a very important distinction to make is structural integrity is not a measure of how far out you can build from a particular structurally stable block. What structural integrity is, and this is going to be important by looking at these 2 structures that I've made, is instead of being a measure of how far out you can build, it's essentially how many blocks you can attach to a particular block face before it falls. Now, wood blocks, as we're going to see a little bit later, can support up to 6 additional wooden blocks before collapse. So essentially, you've seen if we add a 7th one, like normal, it's going to collapse. And you can see we built 7 out. But this time, you can see that we've not built 7 out, but there are still 6 wood blocks attached to this one. So, like before, if we add one, it's still going to fall. The reason is, this block face was supporting 6 blocks, but then it was supporting 7. And then finally, it doesn't matter what direction it's going, so it could be going up or down or any direction, but this time you can see it's going up, and if we add a 7th one, let's add it like there, you can see that the entire thing falls down. So another thing to take away, guys, is that structural integrity is not a measure of how far out you can build, but how many blocks you can attach to a block face of a structurally stable block. So that's very important, so remember that one. Alrighty guys, so now we've been through some of the basics of structural integrity, it's finally time to see how much each of these blocks can support before things start to cave in. Now, before I actually go and show you this, I'm going to show you the way that you can work it out yourself. Now, if we come into our menu here, if you actually select any block that you've got in your inventory, you'll see that it gives you some stats about it, such as the hardness, the max load, the mass, the burn time if it applies, and it will tell you like a little bit about what the block is. Now for this this 101, I want to show you two of these properties, which is the max load and the mass. So essentially, the max load will determine how much mass a particular block face can support before it will collapse, and then the mass is how much the block weighs. The easiest way to think of structural integrity is the max load divided by the mass. So you can work out the structural integrity of wood, which we know is 6, by dividing 24 divided by 4, which gives us 6. So a wood block can support up to 6 other wood blocks on each side. So let's just go and try that. So you can see that I've got some wood blocks here, so I'm going to put 6 on. There we go. Now this block here, let me just have my axe out so I can point to it. So this block here now has the maximum load on this one side. Now another little thing of structural integrity is you can still start adding blocks to this side up to 6 like this. Now the reason is because the structural integrity is not calculated on the whole block, but it's calculated on each individual block face. So essentially, you can build 6 of these in each direction, and it will still be structurally sound. Oh, however, I put that in the wrong place, and that meant that this face was supporting 7, and it fell down. So yeah, that's just another little trick you can take away from structural integrity, that it applies to the faces of the block rather than the whole block itself. So that's the wood. So let's move on to the scrap. Alrighty guys, let's look at the next block that you are most likely going to be building with, which is the scrap iron. So early game you'll start with wood, and then you'll most likely move it up and upgrade it all to scrap iron. Now scrap iron, you can see, can accept a max load of 320 per block face, but you can see that it has a mass of 20, so it can support a lot more, but it is also quite a bit heavier itself. So this should mean that if we do 320 divided by 20, this should be able to support 16 blocks. So let's try it. As you can see, I've got a stable pillar of iron blocks here, so let's start building out. So there's 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and this should be fine. Oh no! Okay, so this begs the question, why has this, although it said it can support 15, or 16, sorry, why has it only dropped off from 15? Well, essentially, with structural integrity, there is a maximum global limit to how far out you can build from any one block face with non-structurally stable blocks. And that maximum limit is 15. So I'm going to demonstrate that it can hold 16 blocks, but we're going to do it this side of the face. So this time, instead of building straight out like we did before, I'm going to build a square of 4x4. So we get 8 there, 12, 16. And you can see that as long as we don't build more than 15 blocks out, it will be able to support 16 blocks. Now if we come over here, we had 15 blocks there, but as you can see, it's going to continue to fall down if we try and put a 16th one on. However, if we put the block, say, somewhere down here, it's fine. So essentially, the linear distance from there to here does actually have a very small effect on structural integrity when you start getting into iron blocks or blocks that can support a lot of weight. So essentially, another rule of structural integrity is never try to build more than 15 blocks out from any one structurally sound pillar, because otherwise it's going to collapse. But you can see this time the whole structure didn't collapse, it was just the one on the end. So that's scrap iron, so let's move on to the next one. Alrighty guys, so the next block that we're going to look at is cobblestone. Now this one has a max load of 72, so 3 times as much as a wood frame or a cobblestone frame. However, the mass of that block is 12, which is also 3 times as much. What this means is cobblestone can support exactly the same amount of cobblestone blocks as wood before it falls down. So you can see I tried to do 7 blocks there, but it couldn't support all 7. But if we do 6 in any configuration we like, so I could do it like this, you can see that it's absolutely fine. So there's cobblestone. Nice and easy, same as wood. Alright, the next one we're going to look at is the rebar. So when you finally get onto building concrete, if you're not upgrading it from, say, scrap iron or cobblestone, you're most likely going to be using rebar to frame it up and then using that to make your concrete. So rebar has a max load of 25, so it's actually quite low for a iron or metal block, and it has a mass of 5, so it's also quite a lot lighter. So what this means is if we do 25 divided by 5, a rebar frame can support up to 5 additional ones, like that. However, if we try and add a 6th one, the whole thing is just going to fall on your face. So what this means, guys, is if you're planning to build large concrete structures, make sure they have got plenty of support, because otherwise you're going to be very unhappy indeed. Alrighty, next up is the concrete block, and this one has a max load of 90, so it's a bit lower than the iron blocks that we've come across before, and it has a mass of 15, so it's also a bit lighter. So if we do 90 divided by 15, we get 6. So again, concrete is pretty much the same as wood. However, if we try and add a 7th one anywhere along here, it's going to collapse. And let's do it just for the hell of it. There we go. And down it goes. So essentially, it's not really a good idea to make your ceilings out of concrete, because it's just going to fall on your face. And the last block we're going to look at, guys, is the steel block. Now you can see this one is exactly the same as the scrap iron and the metal trussing blocks. It's got a max load of 320 and a mass of 20. So this means that it can support up to 16 of these steel blocks on any given face. So let's do it. So this time, remember that the global length limit of 15 is going to apply. So we can't build it 16 blocks out, but what we can do is we can do 2 rows of 8, and it should be absolutely fine. So here we go. And there you go. You can see that the steel is holding all that weight absolutely fine. However, let's just add one and watch this whole thing collapse. Way! Okay guys, so now we've covered the basics of structural integrity, let's look at what happens when we start to actually mix blocks together. Now the first thing I want to point out with the structural integrity is you only need to apply your calculations to the block you're building from. So in all the examples we've had before, you can see that I've been using all the same block. But in this one, we've got a pillar of cobblestone, and then we've got some metal trussing on the top of it. Now, we know that from metal trussing, it can have 16 blocks before the thing collapses. Now, just because this is made of cobblestone, it's not going to make a difference. So I'm going to show you, just ignore that one I placed there. I'm going to show you that this can still support 16 blocks, even though the pillar is made of cobblestone. 9, 10, so that's, I believe that's 10, yep, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So you can see that even though I made this pillar out of cobblestone, because the top block was metal trussing, the structural integrity is being calculated from the face of the top block here. So these blocks below it don't matter at all. So what that means is you can quite freely make your walls, for example, out of concrete, and then have some metal trussing over the top to make your ceilings and your roofs with no problems. Alrighty guys, now the next thing I want to show you is something very, very easy to get wrong when you're upgrading your base. Now, in early game, you're most likely going to have your base built out of scrap iron or cobblestone. Now, if you've built it out of scrap iron, something very bad is going to happen when you upgrade your blocks to concrete. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to upgrade some of these blocks to concrete. And you can see so far, it looks fine. And now that's because concrete weighs less than iron. So actually, we are keeping up the structural integrity just fine. So essentially, the scrap iron weighs 20 and the concrete weighs 15. So now this whole thing is 25 points in weight lighter. So what this should mean is we can add another scrap iron on like that, and you can see that now that we're mixing blocks, it's actually working out okay. However, the problem comes when you upgrade this onto concrete. Watch what happens. Oh no! The whole thing fell in. So, essentially, another golden rule to take away from this is when you're upgrading from scrap iron into concrete, bear in mind that the maximum load that concrete can support is far less than iron. So, make sure that you have some adequate supports underneath, otherwise you're going to find yourself pretty sad because your base is going to have fallen down and potentially fallen on your face as well. So yeah, when you're upgrading from scrap iron to concrete, just be very, very careful that things aren't going to fall in on themselves. Alrighty guys, the last thing I want to show you is a little bit more about mixing blocks. So you can see from the earlier examples, we mixed a bit of scrap iron with some concrete, and you can see, and especially in this example, that we can actually have more than 16 blocks. Now, why is that? Well, when we're looking at building with the same type of block, we can do the basic division to work out how much same blocks it can support. So usually, if we're building everything out of scrap iron, we'd just say, yeah, max load 320 divided by the mass of 20, so it can support 16 scrap iron blocks on it. However, what the max load actually means is how much mass of all the types of blocks it can support on there. So essentially, we know that iron has a max load of 320. And concrete has a mass of 15, while iron has a mass of 20. So essentially what I've done is I've used 7 of these scrap blocks here. So 7 times 20 is going to give us 140 in mass. And then these, you can see, I've got 12 of these. So that's 12 lots of 15 on there, which is going to make 180. So essentially I've done 140 plus 180, which has given me my complete load of 320. So essentially what that means is you can mix blocks safely as long as you work out your maths correctly. Now I'm going to show you an example where things do go a bit wrong when this is done. Now I'm not sure if this is a game mechanic or a bug, but I'm going to show you it regardless. Alright guys, the last thing I'm going to show you then is another little pitfall that we can run into when we are talking about the structure integrity stuff and building things with different blocks. Okay, so what I've done is I've made a structure here, just a very simple 3-block high metal trussing structure. Now, what I want to do is I want to build my ceiling out of wood. Now, if we look at the metal trussing over here, so let's come back in here, we can see that the max load of metal trussing is 320. Now, if we wanted to build the ceiling out of wood, we can see that the mass of wood is only 4. So technically, we could have about 80 blocks of wood on this thing. If we do 320, which is the max load on this, divided by 4, which is the max load on the wood block, we should be able to support 80 wood blocks from this one face of the metal trussing. So let's see if this is true. So let's build out here. So this could be good. So, okay, this is not true. You can see that once we got to the 7th wood block, you can see the whole thing collapsed. Now, why is this? Essentially, the max load applies to, I believe, the weakest block in your chain. So in this case, now that we're building out of wood here, you can see that the weakest block is now the wood. So now for any given block face on the wood, that can only support 6 additional ones before it collapses. Or in this case, because this is now no longer a structurally sound block, it can only support 5. So it can support 5 just fine, but as soon as we go 6, the whole thing falls down. So remember, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So when you're building with the metal trussing, what I recommend you do instead is build your metal trussing out like this, and then, once you've done that, then you can start putting the wood on like this, and then each of these, you can see, will then be able to have up to 6 coming out, I believe. Let's see how far along this can go. But I believe this should be able to go quite a long way. Yeah, so you can see now these woods can have up to 5 along. Hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so now you can see these can have up to 6 along before they collapse, because I built the top of the structure here out of metal trussing. So essentially, the structural integrity is calculated per block face, not just on this block face here. It's actually calculated per block face as well. So essentially what I mean is this block can handle up to 320 mass on each of its faces. However, because this is the first in a chain of blocks, it can only support 300. But as we go along here now, you can see that now these wood blocks can only support up to 24, judging by the maths. So we can only have up to 6 wood blocks coming out here, because each of these wood blocks weighs 4. If we add a 7th one, it will collapse. Alrighty guys, well with that covers our tutorial on structural integrity, so I hope you can use some of the knowledge from this video to go out and build yourself some awesome stable bases that are completely zombie proof and that you're going to have little trouble maintaining and repairing. So if you do have any questions, be sure to let me know in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as possible, and if I don't know the answer, I'll be sure to point you in the direction of someone that does. So I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and I will see you next time. So until then, bye!